Friday practice in Saudi Arabia is over, and the fastest driver of the day was Lando Norris in the Mclaren, as teammate Oscar Piastri was right behind him, and it's looking like McLaren are once again looking very strong. But what did we learn? Well, in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at the data and doing an analysis from practice. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. Now, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep, practice in Jeddah is over, and it was a tricky day. Pirelli brought steps off the tyres this year, but it looked like many drivers were actually struggling with grip, as we saw a lot of snaps and lockups, and the drivers were finding their way around the tricky high-speed circuit. Well, tricky. That being said, there was only one red flag, and that came at the end of FP2, as Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull hit the inside of the wall at the final corner, and then he got spat off into the wall on the outside. Like in Bahrain, FP1 took place during the daytime, much like FP3 will, and FP2 is the only session at night, meaning that for a second weekend in a row, FP2 is really the only representative session, and you can see that as we compare the times from Pierre Gasly, who was the fastest driver in FP1, to Lando Norris in FP2. So let's see how the times changed between the two sessions. And when you look at the two lap times, you can see that firstly, there is a massive difference between Gasly and Norris when it comes to the top speed that they are reaching. Alpine this weekend, I think, are running with a bit less downforce, at least compared to McLaren, because down the straights, Gasly is clearly faster. But when it comes to the speed carried through the corners, you can see that McLaren and Norris have a clear advantage. The tyres in FP2 would be in much better conditions, but also Norris is carrying significantly more minimum apex speed, and a lot of that would be down to the fact that the McLaren is simply a better car, and is looking to actually be in great shape this weekend. However, that being said, there is one thing that I did notice, and that is actually there is only just less than 1 second between the two lap times, even though one was set during the day and one was set at night, which compared to Bahrain just a week ago is very interesting, as there was a large gap between the two sessions. And I think that's because the softs, which of course are a step softer this year, might be struggling to just hang on quite as well when it comes to the end of the lap. So we've seen how the times change between the two sessions, but now let's take a look at the top speeds that the teams are able to reach. And what can we see here? Well, what we can see is that the two top midfield teams are much faster than everyone else, and that is Sauber and Haas, as Hülkenberg reaches 337 km per hour and Ocon in the Haas hits 335 km per hour. These two were a fair bit faster than anyone else, and I think it indicated that they were probably running with the power units turned up a little bit more than their rivals, and they were probably running with a little bit less downforce. When it came to the front runners, Ferrari and Red Bull were tied on top speeds, as both teams hit 332 km per hour. The slowest car in a straight line overall was once again McLaren, as they only reached a top speed of 328 km per hour, potentially indicating that they have slightly more downforce than the rest of the field currently around them, which could be a concern for the rest of the competition. So we've seen how the top speeds compared, but now let's take a quick look at the rookies and see who was looking good. Well, one thing I noticed from the rookies, which I think goes to show how tricky this circuit is that none of the 6 drivers were in the top 10 in either FP1 or FP2. Antonelli was the closest driver to the top 10, as he finished in 11th place in FP2, and Isaac Hadjar in the Racing Bulls was 1 place behind him in 12th place, as Hadjar is once again showing very good performances in the Racing Bulls car. Sadly for Gabriel Bortoleto, he couldn't go out in FP2 due to a fuel leak, and therefore he has lost the most important practice session of the weekend. With that in mind, let's see how the rookies get on for the rest of the weekend. If you're enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. But now, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Ferrari. For Ferrari then, it was a bit of a mixed bag day, as Charles Leclerc was 4th fastest in FP2 and he's looking pretty good. But teammate Lewis Hamilton seems to be quite a bit off Leclerc and finished in 13th place. In FP1, both Leclerc and Hamilton were running with different spec rear wings, but in FP2 they had the same updated spec rear wing, and well, at least over one lap, it looks as though there is still plenty of work to do for Lewis Hamilton, as he is still trying to get to grips with the Ferrari car. But how did Hamilton actually compare to Leclerc? Well, let's compare the fastest laps from both drivers and what can we see? Well, when you look at the 2 lap times, the main areas where Hamilton loses out to Leclerc is pretty much at the minimum apex speed at each braking zone. Fairly consistently, Hamilton is actually down on Leclerc when it comes to the speed carried, and because of this, Hamilton is just bleeding time away. On the exits, they are pretty similar, but Hamilton is always going to be a couple kilometers per hour down on teammate Leclerc due to not getting as good of a run through the actual corner. Thankfully for Lewis Hamilton, he can go over the data and potentially try to find where he is losing out to try and close the gap when it comes to qualifying. But I don't think he's quite there yet, and he will probably be beaten by Leclerc when it comes to Grand Prix qualifying. For Red Bull then, it was a relatively strong day for Max Verstappen, as he was 3rd fastest and was only beaten by the McLaren drivers, and Yuki Tsunoda until his incident was also looking pretty strong. As I mentioned in my preview and predictions, this is a better circuit for the team, as the circuit is more of a front limited circuit. Let's now compare the fastest times then of Lando Norris to Max Verstappen, so we can see where Verstappen and Red Bull still need to improve just a little bit. And when you look at these 2 lap times, it's actually a little bit scruffy in areas for Red Bull and Verstappen, particularly early on in the lap, which I think should make sense based on what we have seen from Red Bull. Even at this high speed circuit, they are still down when it comes to the slower speed corners compared to McLaren, and you can see Norris actually just has a little bit more confidence and can carry more speed, kind of like what we just saw with Hamilton when it came to him versus Leclerc. For Red Bull, they tend to improve the car as the weekend goes on, so it will be interesting to see if they can overcome the gap tonight, and in qualifying, if Verstappen can pull out a magical lap to potentially beat a McLaren, who otherwise are looking unstoppable. For Mercedes then, they look like they might be having a slightly more tricky weekend, at least so far compared to what we have seen this season, as George Russell was 7th fastest and Kimi Antonelli was 11th fastest. For Kimi Antonelli, he was pushing the limits of the circuit, and he hit the wall on the exit of the final corner, but he managed to get away with it. For Mercedes and Russell then, let's now compare his fastest lap to that of Charles Leclerc. And when you compare the 2 laps in Sector 1, it is actually advantage Mercedes, and things in general are looking pretty good. But at a few of the braking zones, Leclerc does seem to carry a little bit more minimum apex speed, and he uses that to his advantage, and claws back the slight time lost in Sector 1. But the main area where Russell lost out was the fast chicane at the end of the second DRS zone, as Leclerc got a much better run and gained several tenths through that section alone. Overall, between them, there was a 2 tenths gap. For Mercedes and Russell, it looks like they could have struggled a little bit more with some high speed instability, which can easily happen at this circuit, and that is something that they will just have to fix overnight and be in a better position for qualifying. Finally for McLaren then, free practice showed that they are once again looking very strong, as Lando Norris was the fastest driver of the day and Oscar Piastri was in 2nd place. And honestly, if they keep this up, then it should be a straightforward 1-2 in qualifying. But as ever with McLaren, things are never straightforward, and we will have to wait and see if both Norris and Piastri can get through qualifying without any bottles or silly errors. Let's now compare the fastest lap of the 2 drivers to see where Piastri lost out. When you look at the 2 lap times, it looks as though going into the first braking zone that Piastri brakes a little bit harder and loses a bit more time than Lando Norris. But on the exit of the next braking zone, Piastri gets a fantastic exit and gains back all the time that he just lost, and he actually became the faster driver. However, at the chicane after the hairpin, Norris gets a much better run and becomes the fastest driver once again, and pretty much carries that edge all the way through the rest of the lap. Norris also gets a stronger exit from the final corner as well. Going into qualifying, as I mentioned, McLaren should be in a very solid position. It is just whether or not they can keep it all together for both drivers during qualifying. So with that in mind then, what are my top 5 predictions for qualifying for the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix? Well, for once, I'm actually going to include a second Red Bull driver, because in P5, I'm going to go for Yuki Tsunoda in the Red Bull. P4 will be Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. P3 will still be Lando Norris in the McLaren. P2 will be Max Verstappen in the Red Bull, and I'm going to still go for Oscar Piastri to take pole position. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. Thank you all so much for watching.